In 1999, Morpheus offered Neo a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. In 2018, this country fractured between red and blue. In 2022, I'm here to tell you that if you really want the truth, more voters are neither red or blue. Yet, they have no representation, no choice, and no options. They have to choose between candidates chosen by the red people or the blue people. I'm David Esrati, and I'm running for Congress as an American, as in red, white, and blue. I'm a veteran, an activist, and a small businessman. I'm asking you to join me in reminding the professional politicians in Congress who their bosses are. I support ranked choice voting, campaign finance reform, and a verified voter information system, all so we can stop having the best politicians money can buy. It's time to elect a veteran who will work for you, no matter what color they want to label you. Please go to electesrati.com and learn more. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. In Jurassic Park, you thought those little baby dinosaurs were cute until they turned into out-of-control carnivores. That's sort of what happens to government when we elect people based on very expensive advertising campaigns and propaganda. I'm David Esrati. I'm a veteran and a small businessman running for Congress. You don't want professional ad people and pollsters to sway your vote. All those hot-button issues like gun control, abortion, borders are all politicized to stop you from voting rationally. And thinking rationally seems to be in short supply these days. Most Americans have been voting against their own best self-interest for a long time because we've allowed money to buy our leaders. 1 million Americans died in the last 2 years because our leaders couldn't lead. It wasn't that hard. Mask, distance, test, and then vaccinate. In an instant, we had billions to spend on healthcare for COVID, when for years we've been told we can't provide healthcare for everyone equally in this country. That's an unintended consequence of the pandemic. If you think about it, our government can pretty much do whatever it wants, or what the people who buy our politicians tell our leaders to do. We also had a ton of money to prop up businesses. The next thing you know, it turns out that a living wage was not only possible, but necessary. As a small businessman who won't sell you out to corporate interests and lobbyists, I can tell you that it's time to fully understand the consequences of companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google and their effect on small business, and to remind you that small business is the #1 creator of jobs in this country. So this next election, don't trust this ad or any other political ad. Do your homework and think before you vote. It's time to put this ad man in Congress because I know that the best advertising is based on the truth, not the size of the budget or payola. Or you can just vote based on who has the money to buy their way into Congress and live with the consequences. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. Hi, I'm David Esrati, and obviously I'm not here by myself tonight. So we have Tina Marker.
Hi.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
Tina and I have known each other for a long time. We're both in the advertising business, and we both own our own firms. But before we go on to that, I'm going to clear up a few things. One, I'm running for Congress against Mike Turner in OH-10, which is all of Montgomery County, all of Greene County, and a part of Clark. Tina lives in Greene County. And you might also notice that I've got the new shirt on. Defund politicians, elections not auctions. They're available now on the website at electesrati.com/donate. For $100, you get one free, or you can go into the shop and buy one for $35 and go from there. So this is interactive. And so if you are on YouTube, you can ask questions. We might be able to see the questions on Facebook today, so we can answer questions for either one. Remember, there are rules to this. Behave yourselves. Don't just keep plastering away. You have to wait until someone else has asked a question before you can keep going. And what we're going to talk about is, it's got all kinds of different names. death with dignity, euthanasia, assisted suicide, medical aid in dying, or assisted dying. And we each have a story about this, but I'm going to let Tina tell hers first so that you get a little background, because I've already got a link to a couple things on my blog in the description, so somebody might have read that, and we'll get to that soon. And I know this is a hard subject for you, and I thank you for coming on. But this is an important subject, so that's why I want to tackle it.
It is a very difficult subject, and it needs to be talked about. Yeah, I'll keep my composure. I will try. I lost my husband a year ago in April to a disease that is totally incurable called early onset Alzheimer's disease. It's very rare in the Alzheimer's spectrum. Only 5% of people who have Alzheimer's have this early onset variety. It's not your typical Alzheimer's. It's not your aging in place like you think of grandma forgot her keys, or
right.
Grandma can't find her car, or the cat's the dog now. So it is something that just came up when my husband was diagnosed. He was diagnosed in 2014. He survived for 7 years, if you want to call it that. His quality of life kept deteriorating. And early on, we had the discussion whether or not it would be wise for us to go ahead and move to Oregon, because we knew it was legal in Oregon to go ahead and do the assisted suicide. And as we did more research, we found that we didn't know if we would meet the residency rules, because I believe at the time it was 6 years you had to live there.
Oh, really? Okay.
I believe that's what it was. And we were just afraid it would just
pointless.
Work against us, yeah.
Right.
So we decided to not move, and we stuck it out. So if things could be done differently, I mean, you let your pets die with dignity. Why can't you allow your spouse or your loved one to die that way?
Now, just to why, obviously I've known about this going on a long time with you, but this came up. I read an article in the New York Times about the author Judy Blume, who wrote all the books for teens that were kind of risque at the time. I don't know if they still qualify as risque, but she had met the love of her life, and David was the love of your life. And her husband had a similar sort of thing, and they had to search all over to find a solution. And I think I should have reread the article, but I think their solution was to go to Switzerland.
It was.
And spend quite a bit of money.
It was very expensive. I think 15 grand.
15 grand, so he could end his life on his own terms. And that is kind of, it's difficult. And for me, when I've had to put my pets down, I don't even want to take them to the vet. I have the vet come to my house. And both my dogs have died in the living room without the trauma of going somewhere. It was very peaceful and calm. But when my mother had dementia, at first I tried to manage it in the house. And then I tried to, we tried at a nursing home. And their general solution was to sedate her. And they hooked her on opiates. And on top of that, she had serious problem with her hip, and they didn't want to provide a hip replacement. Even though she'd been through some other surgeries, they said she can't handle it. So the only option was to do this procedure, and I can't remember the name of it now, but they start out like doing the hip replacement. They cut off the top of the femur that goes into the ball, and they just leave it there. And so you can't ever stand on your leg again, but the pain is gone from the socket. This sounds like a horrible, crippling thing. And, she would have been fine through that, except the withdrawal from the opiates and the surgery and the anesthesia. In the middle of the night, the hospital said, oh, we're going to put you on a ventilator without consulting me, because she had a DNR and but they said in 24 hours we can do anything we want. They put her on a ventilator and beat her to death for 6 days before they took her off, shipped her to hospice. She never really regained consciousness after they kept sedating her for every bit of pain she had. And it was very sad as she withered off and died, whereas we could have done this a different way. And hospice has become popular for hospitals because they don't want you to die in the hospital because that's bad for their stats. So they send you to hospice instead. And there the answer to everything is sedate you. And it was difficult.
It's very difficult, David. And my David and I we made a pact when he became diagnosed. He wasn't your typical person who just kind of drifts into the Alzheimer's mode. They said that his IQ was so high that he was highly cognizant that he had Alzheimer's. And he knew what was going on around him, and it delayed the progression of the disease.
So he was actually trapped in his body.
Absolutely.
Knowing what was going on, but unable to communicate.
And we made that agreement that I would keep him in the home as long as I possibly could. He went in for a med adjustment 2 weeks before he died, and through hospice.
Right.
And we thought we were just going in to regulate his medicines because they weren't working. And it took me forever to get hospice approval, and I was trying to do everything by myself, and they kept denying me every time I applied for hospice assistance because of David's, again, his IQ level. He scored higher on those assessments every time they came into the house and they assessed him, and they kept denying coverage for us, and it was terrible trying to deal with that.
So the doctors were saying one thing, but the insurance companies were saying something else.
Exactly. And, and hospice, told me right out that they have to be very, very careful who they go ahead and approve, because Medicare will come back and try to collect money if Medicare makes the recommendation that the person wasn't ready to be placed in hospice care. So, even once we got approved, it was shortly before, he took his downturn, because we didn't get approved until January. He died in April. I thought he was going to live another year and a half, that we were going to be dealing with this in the home. So I'm blessed that Dave and I are both blessed that it didn't get prolonged and it didn't drag out. And it was after he went in there for that med adjustment, then all of a sudden he just made his mind up that he was done.
And he had a living will, and he had an advance directive.
Yes.
And he had given you the power to make those decisions, correct?
Absolutely.
And you know what he wanted.
Oh, I knew what he wanted. Trying to keep his quality of life was impossible. It was gone. He had no quality of life anymore. It was like taking care of a toddler who had ADHD.
Yeah.
It was no longer my husband. It was no longer him. He had deteriorated that much that it was no longer him, but I was trying to keep him happy and keep him to the point where, we had to go along with the medical protocol. He went through 3 clinical trials at the Ohio State University. He was trying to help find a cure for this god-awful disease. And there isn't one. It's incurable.
My father was in the hospital for the last 3 months of his life. And I would bring my mother out every day. And they had lived across the street from me for 10 years at that point. So I knew how they interacted. But I saw something from my father in the hospital, it was probably about a month in, that shocked me. He hadn't gotten out of bed. He had complained that he had neuropathy in his legs, and he was diabetic and everything. But my mother came in, and she commented about the pink stockings that he had on. They had these compression stockings, and they were pink. And about the same color as your blouse. And he snapped at her. And he said something to the effect of, "Woman, can't you talk about something important?" And she was she couldn't process the whole thing. Her brain was no longer working on the level that of the woman that he had married. And I'd been so focused on him that I hadn't seen her degeneration, and I hadn't seen how it was affecting him. But I truly believe he lost the will to live because he didn't want to live with a woman that wasn't his wife anymore. And I always thought they would die within a day or two of themselves. each other. I thought they were that kind of a couple. I mean, they met and got married in 3 days. That was how they described it. They moved in together, but they got married 4 times because none of the first 3 were legal. So they had a ship's captain, they had this, they had that. So I always thought that, but the crazy thing was that I took my mother out to dinner the night my father died, and she didn't even know he died. And it was just painful to see her slide out of that. So that's my parents and my most recent experience with this. But the story that really, where this really made it evident for me, I moved around a lot until I hit 3rd grade. I had moved like every couple of years, so new friends, new places. And in 3rd grade, we were sitting in our desks pushed together. There were 6 desks per little group in the class. And I was over here, and I think we were doing it alphabetically, of course. And over there was, on my little grouping, was a little blonde girl named Katie Jones. And Katie had a little pixie nose, and she had straight blonde hair. She looked like a little Susan Day, though I don't think the Partridge Family was on yet.
Probably not.
And I thought she was the bomb. Of course, I didn't know that word then. But so one day I got really, really bold. I wrote on a note, I said, "I love you," put Katie's name on it, folded it up, and passed it over, and hoped that nobody would open it because I would have been so embarrassed. And that was when kids were still, love was not something that you would talk about. And Katie opened it, and she smiled, and then she wrote on it, and then sent it back to me. And she just put the word "to" with an exclamation point. And at the bottom of the exclamation point was a little heart instead of a dot.
Oh.
And so my heart went boom, 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 boom. And Katie would come over to the house sometimes. I'd go over to her house. But it never really turned into anything. I think I finally kissed her in 4th grade one time. And I thought she was my girlfriend all the way until junior high. But I'd always had a crush on her. And when I was in the Army, I came home one Christmas, and a bunch of us had gotten together in the basement of this place called Our Gang 2 up in University Circle. It was like a Max and Irma's before Max and Irma's. And we were downstairs, and we were all having a good time. And I don't drink, but Katie sure did. So she was a little sloshed, and she smoked, which was something I couldn't believe. But she came up to me, threw her arms around me, and told me I'd always be special, and gave me a big sloppy kiss. And my heart went boom, boom, boom again, and I went off to the Army. She went on to Ohio State, went to law school, graduated, and she moved out to, I know this is a long setup, folks, but bear with me. She moved out to her Albuquerque, New Mexico, her dream place. She got a job as a lawyer. She was doing great. Everything was wonderful. And at 28, she got MS. And she didn't get just the run-of-the-mill MS. She got the full onset. So first, she was working from home partially, and then this was long before computers. She was 33 at the time that she left us. But she started working from home, then she needed assistance, then she needed full-time care. Her sister moved down to take care of her. And I was still in touch with her. And I remember this call, and I said, "Katie, do you want me to come and see you?" And she said, "I don't want you to remember me like this." So I didn't go see her. And it was probably the best gift she ever gave me, because I still remember that kiss at Our Gang way more than what I would have seen when I went to see her. And when I called her back, another time, and it was hard for her to talk even at this point, so I didn't call very often. One day I called, she didn't answer, and I called all the Catherine Joneses in the phone book in Albuquerque, and this woman said, "I think I heard she died." And so I found her mother, which was a major accomplishment, and she told me that Katie had had an assisted suicide at 33 years old. And it was illegal to do that, so she couldn't tell anybody goodbye. She couldn't say goodbye. She couldn't tell anybody why she did it, or share any of the things she wanted. But that's how she left.
And how did you feel about that at that time?
At that time, I was devastated that she was gone, that she wasn't going to be here anymore. But I understood it. And I understood what she went through and why. And she shouldn't have had to do it. And I'm the one getting all emotional. But
yeah, well, give me a minute. I'll probably leave it too. It's not easy to watch or know that people are suffering. And when a person no longer has a quality of life, I mean, my husband just, like I said, he was like a caged animal. He was like a 3-year-old with ADHD and on Mountain Dew speed. I mean, all he did was pace and pace and pace and pace and pace, and I couldn't get him to relax. I couldn't get him to calm down. He was in so much misery and pain.
And
it was just,
and
it
for
was
you,
not a good life.
And for you, your life had become totally centered around that. I mean, you had to be there because he couldn't be left by himself.
No, he couldn't. And he wondered, and he would have never wanted to deteriorate to that point. I mean, one of his many degrees that he was a registered nurse. So, I mean, he was very aware of the medical conditions and what was going to happen to him, and that's one of the reasons he wanted to go to Ohio State. And I still remember him going in and talking to his boss, and they were so good to him when he was diagnosed. And they said, well, what are you going to do at Ohio State? And he looked at her and he goes, they're going to fix me. They're going to fix me. And he was so excited and so hopeful. But there is no cure for this illness. It's been around since the early 1900s. It still has absolutely no medicine that helps it, nothing to slow it down. I mean, some people would, have it for 10, 12 years. Some people have it for 5 or 7. In my husband's case, it was only 7.
And let's be clear. Back in 1900, you didn't live to be much more than 60, typically.
Oh, no, you didn't.
So people died well before that. Our life expectancy has grown exponentially over the years. And it's only been the last few years during COVID that the average life expectancy has dropped on the planet, because previously it kept getting longer and longer thanks to science. Now, you can't talk about physician-assisted suicide or any of this without talking about somebody called Dr. Jack Kevorkian.
Yep. Dr. Death.
Dr. Death. And, I did a little research and found out some things I didn't know about him, but he was interested in this as early as when he was in med school. He went to the University of Michigan in the state up north, and he graduated in 1952. And while he was a resident, he proposed giving murderers condemned to die the option of being executed with anesthesia in order to subject their bodies to medical experimentation and allow the harvesting of their healthy organs. He delivered a paper on the subject to the meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1958. And he was not well received. This has been something that's been going on for a long time. He later created a machine to let people do it to themselves, and he called it a meticide. And he called the machine either the Mercitron or the Thanatron. And people have made fun of these things and haven't taken it seriously. He ended up spending 8 years in prison for doing what he thought was right. He taunted the courts. He said, basically, throw me in prison because this needs to be dealt with. And I can't understand why this concept is still so foreign to us in this country. Currently, there are 8 states that allow it. I see you brought a map. I have
There are 9, actually. There are 9.
There are 9. Okay.
Well, actually, this last report here by Charlotte Lozier Institute is showing 10.
10. Well, I heard Michigan was considering something, but I had Colorado, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington. I think Vermont has passed something.
Montana's a throw-in.
Yeah.
with the Baxter versus Montana case law precedent. But outside of that, I mean, the only states that are truly allowed would be, you got your West Coast, you got Washington, Oregon, California, then you got Colorado, New Mexico. You've got Hawaii, which I didn't know. I didn't know that until I started doing more research.
Nice place to go
I
die.
could have, yeah.
Yeah.
We could have gone to Kauai, and yeah. And then on the East Coast, you've got Maine and Vermont and New Jersey, and then you've got D.C. So those are the
That's it.
only states.
Now,
And why have, and you see the different names as it's been
Right.
passed and how it was authorized, whether it was a ballot through legislature.
the Death with Dignity Act is one. There's one called the Vermont Patient Choice and Control at the End of Life Act. We have the California End of Life option. DC, along with others, is Death with Dignity. Hawaii says Our Care, Our Choice. New Jersey's Medical Aid in Dying for the Terminally Ill. Maine's Death with Dignity. New Mexico has the New Mexico Elizabeth Whitefield End of Life Options Act. And here's the crazy thing. You know, this has been figured out in other countries, in Austria, Belgium, Canada, Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Spain, Switzerland, Australia, and Colombia, Germany, and Italy all have provisions or have been moving towards this. Okay, so it's not that it's a mystery. Now, there is one other part of this that people get very concerned about, and that's allowing people who are healthy to choose to terminate their own lives. And this part, and there's a few countries that say you can just say, hey, I want to die. I don't want to continue. I don't enjoy being alive. And it's called voluntary euthanasia. And you don't need a terminal diagnosis. According to what I found, it's Germany, Canada, Switzerland, Spain, Austria, Belgium, and the Netherlands, that you can just say, I'm done. I'm checking out.
Well, I think that should not be allowed.
Well,
I mean, you've got criteria that should be developed, and in our situation with my husband, we would have defined that criteria ahead of time. If X, Y, and Z happens, then we're going to move forward. Other than that, then we weren't going to. So, and it's something that we never got to seriously consider.
Right, because it wasn't an option.
Because it's not an option.
But I want to talk about this voluntary euthanasia just a little bit, because suicide is a huge problem in this country, in this time, in this day and age. And one of the problems with suicide is, again, it's against the law. It's against the law for you to end your own life. So people do things in ways that aren't necessarily as, shall I say, clean and neat. Now, I'm not advocating for suicide, but I am somebody who had an experience with somebody suicidal when I was 9. My mother tried to commit suicide. I wrote about it on my blog not very long ago, and there's a link in the bottom on the YouTube there in the comments. But I have known other friends and people that have committed suicide, and I know what happens is it's not just their commission of the act that causes the problem, but the people around them. Because they're not allowed to discuss it. They're not allowed to explain it. Finding the note afterwards can be really hard on people.
Or no note.
Or no note at all. And then they sit there living and wondering, why did this happen? And if we had that provision and it was an option, maybe we'd have less people shooting themselves with a gun and making a huge mess and having to have their loved ones find them that way, which is traumatic beyond belief, or find them hanging all kinds of different ways. The other thing is when you go to talk about it, maybe somebody can offer advice or solution or work towards fixing it, because that would be open. It is a better way of managing it than the other way, in my opinion. Now, I am not going to go as far as to say I am going to get into Congress and start screaming for, voluntary euthanasia right off the bat. I mean, that I am not going to do. But I do believe death with dignity is something that's long overdue in this country. And we've got some comments here, so I'm going to read them real quick while you're talking.
I'd just like to know, survey-wise, I mean, Ohio, where do people stand with it? I know there are a lot of people who would be anti, but I also know a lot of people who would be in favor of exploring this further and finding out more additional details as to what it would entail. I've known a lot of people who they got their diagnosis with cancer and that was it. They committed suicide. That's rare. But I watched my grandmother suffer from a brain tumor. I watched my ex-husband have a brain tumor. My mother-in-law just passed from a brain tumor. My mother died of breast cancer. The quality of life, the pain, the misery.
And also the expense. These preventative measures, when they know there is no real hope, is incredibly expensive and a burden on the economy and the whole system.
Well, when you reach the point where there's no point of return and a person no longer has a quality of life, I just think...
Or the will to live.
Exactly, and a lot of people don't. They give up. They quit fighting.
So
go ahead. You got.
I've got Mark, who I've known for a very long time, and he says he agrees with me, on a very small list. He's very sorry to hear the stories of both me and Tina, and his heart goes out to both of us. Mark's a good guy, even though he's a Republican. Then he says, after watching both of our parents go through the long goodbye, my wife and I have both said, give me a cocktail and tell me goodbye. So there you have it. One of our viewers feels the same way. Now, this next person I have known for not half as long as I've known Mark. No, not quite. I've known Mark way too long. Is Jennifer, who says she's sobbing, obviously too close to home for me with multiple sclerosis. She's seen way too many friends die without dignity, robbed by such diseases. The first time I met Jennifer face to face, I walked down to Miami Valley Hospital to visit her because she was alone in the hospital, undergoing yet another round of treatments for her MS, and she was lonely and she was in pain. And we'd just been Facebook friends up until that point. And she couldn't believe that I took the time to go see her. I mean...
Well, that's an amazing point, David, because when David was forced into medical retirement, I mean, he had all these wonderful friends at his workplace, and they just all go away.
Yeah.
And they aren't there, and they don't visit, and they don't call, and they don't check. And the person who's ill is all of a sudden they're ill. They've got a terminal sentence, and they're losing all their friends. They feel alienated, isolated, but they're expected to go ahead and keep hanging on and hanging on and hanging on into who knows how long, when you know there's just no hope. Now, would I have recommended it, when he was first diagnosed? No, absolutely not. He was normal for several years after he was diagnosed.
But it's still, the people, they back off.
They do. They drop like flies.
So one of the things I'm dealing with right now, and I'm doing a horrible job of it, is that my mother's roommate from the nursing home, who was awesome to my mother through my mother's dementia, where sometimes she got downright mean. I mean, it's one of the things that happens when you have bad dementia. You just lash out at people. So I
have no filters anymore.
Yeah, the filter's gone. That's the first thing to go. Mm-hmm. But she was awesome, and so I have stayed taking care of her in the ways that I can. I paid for her cell phone, made sure she had one. We moved her into one place, then moved her to another, then moved her to a third. And I haven't gone to see her near as often as I used to, which used to be about once a week pretty consistently. Mm-hmm. I used to see my mother every day. Now, this is somebody that's not related to me, not anything, okay? She's 63 years old. She spent 1.5 years in a coma, a medically induced coma after a stroke. She has almost no use of one side of her body. And she's had multiple small strokes lately. And her life is absolutely, she can't do the things that she wanted to do. And in fact, now she can't even answer the phone or has lost the will to.
How many friends does she have left?
Her own daughters don't even come.
I mean, that's just part of the problem. I mean, people are supposed to fend for themselves, but people are so judgmental about choices that people might make with what they want to do with their future, but the people aren't there to help.
She's very alone almost all day long. She can't really get out of bed much and do much anymore. She used to do this artwork with these little beaded jewels where you put it on a, it's a thing I'd never seen before. It's like a crochet net, and you glue them in like paint by numbers, only it's gemstones by numbers. She can't do that anymore. And John, the veteran I take care of, used to take her out to eat too. He'd go visit her as well. And we can't even get her out to do these things. And the saddest thing was there's one guy from this church that used to come all the time. And she told me about a month ago that he died. I called him. He was still alive. And he said, I don't know why she gets that. And I see her, I tell her, oh no, he's dead. I'm like, no, he's not. And I mean, she is convinced that he's gone. None of it. I mean, it's a horrible life. And I've seen her go in the hospital again and again and again, and they can't do anything to improve her quality of life. And for her to have this option, I'm pretty sure she would have taken it multiple times.
But at that point, it's too late to discuss it.
Oh yeah. And it's just sad. I mean, she's wasted away down to, she's under 100 pounds now, I'm sure. And she used to be a pretty robust woman and used to play soccer growing up and into her adult life. But stroke after stroke has just done a lot of damage.
Yeah, they can be very devastating. So David, why do you think Ohio is so backwards to where these other 10 states have stepped forward?
So if you look at those states, almost all of them are Democratic states, liberal states. More progressive, Oregon obviously was the one that led the way a long time ago, I think in the mid-90s. I think Ohio has this puritanical outlook on how we should tell people what to do. And we've done it with guns, we've done it with abortion, we've done it with almost every single thing. And it's not healthy, and it's not something that I think these legislators think about. They think once you're put on this planet, it's God's will. And if we can continue to stick this needle in you or poke you with this or give you this drug, that we can somehow sustain life. We're being godlike and helping, and we're not.
Well, and Big Pharma is going to have their hands in it too, because they'd be losing a lot of money. So.
Oh, they just announced a new Alzheimer's drug today and said that we've seen, reductions, but when you find out the drug costs a couple $100,000 for a treatment run and it takes 6 months to see any kind of reduction in symptoms, really, who's going to pay for that? And is it what people want? So Jennifer also add, if my disease ever progresses to the final period and I know quality of life, I want to throw a big party and say goodbye the way I want and not be a burden. Screw nursing homes or hospice. Jennifer, she lost her filter a long time ago too.
Do you watch Grace and Frankie? Have you watched that series?
I have watched some of it, but I haven't.
The one episode where the woman had set up her own death and she threw a huge party for herself, and people didn't realize. A lot of people didn't realize what was coming down. So some of them were shocked, and some of them were very supportive.
Grace and Frankie stars Martin Sheen, who grew up in this neighborhood,
Absolutely.
right about 4 blocks from here. So. And Jennifer says, my twice-a-year MS treatment is $500,000. So there's somebody making money off of Jennifer being ill, but it sure ain't Jennifer. Anyway. I
have a niece who was just diagnosed a couple years ago. So
yeah, it's really tough. I want to quote, sort of as a close, a prominent Michigan journalist who covered Dr. Kevorkian's one-man campaign wrote in the Detroit Metro Times, Jack Kevorkian, faults and all, was a major force for good in this society. He forced us to pay attention to one of the biggest elephants in society's living room, the fact that today vast numbers of people are alive who would rather be dead, who have lives not worth living. And
I was a Dr. Kevorkian fan. When that was all going on, I followed it. I thought people should have the choice. Why shouldn't they? Now, he did some stuff that was underhanded, and some of that's come out. But yeah, why shouldn't people have that choice? I just lost my black lab in July, and same as you, I called in one of those vet services. First time I've been able to do that. But I thought, what a calm, peaceful experience that was. He developed a rare cancer. It happened in 2 weeks. He all of a sudden shut down. We'd had him back and forth to the vet a couple times, and he wasn't getting any better, and it was declared to be a rare cancer, and there wasn't anything else we could do for the poor guy. He was like my child. He was absolutely like my child, and I made that choice on his behalf because he looked at me with his eyes, and he told me, Mom, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready, Mom. And thank goodness I had the power to be able to help him because he was so miserable. And why should a person not be able to do that?
Yeah, exactly. All right. I'd like to thank Tina for coming here because
A lot of loss.
this isn't the easiest subject to talk
No,
about.
it's not.
And it's not something most politicians want to talk about, especially because basically it's a downer. Politicians like to talk about great things and wonderful things, or they like to be angry. And this isn't something to be angry about. This is just part of life. And we need to get government out of this decision and put it in the hands of patients and doctors and families who probably know best what the solution is, and let people have the option to exit with distinguished grace instead of what we have now. Anyways, I'd like to thank all the people who stuck with us for all this time. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe and share it or talk to people about it, because this is stuff that needs to be talked about. There are some links down below on the posts that I've written in the past. And I think Tina is able to be found on Twitter at Winward if you want to send her a message.
That's correct.
And you know how to get a hold of me. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, because this is the difference between me and Mike Turner. We actually talk to the community and talk to the voters about things that are important, because we want your input and we want to make sure that you know who you're voting for. Jennifer Pipeson, thank you both for this important conversation and sharing such personal stories of love.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mark, too. I appreciate your comments.
And with that, we'll see you tomorrow.